Welcome to viewers of Diaspora Voices. Here we focus on lives from within our community who have settled away from Kashmir. Today our focus is on the Pahari language, our mother tongue. We'll start with myself. It seems a very long time ago now, when in the early 1960s, I first became aware of language and my mother tongue. Let me read a bit of a blog I wrote under the title, My Mother Tongue and Other Languages. I grew up in a little village in Azad Kashmir. It was a simple world. Here I was to learn my first words from Beji and others in my family. As soon as I was old enough, I went to the local school. It was about a half-hour walk away, over the other side of the ravine, the Kuss. As soon as I arrived at the school, I realized that my mother tongue was not a proper language. After all, it didn't even have a name. So I set to learn Urdu. Some of the vocabulary was familiar, but there were many words I had to learn from scratch and discover their meaning. I then went to the secondary school. Now, as well as being exposed to a number of other subjects, I began to learn new languages alongside Urdu. There was Farsi, which seemed like Urdu, just stranger. It helped us to understand some of the writing of Allama Iqbal, our national poet. We learned Arabic. We also learned English. I didn't know why we were learning this language. Maybe it would help some of the boys when they went to Vilayat, England, to join their fathers there. Little did I know at the time that I too would soon be sent to England to live with my older sister, who had gone there after marrying my cousin. I arrived in England in 1970. I quickly realized that the languages I knew did not count in my new country. The only thing that mattered was how good was my English. So that was then in 1970 when I arrived in England. 50 plus years later, here we are in 2024. This year we start to celebrate the Pahari language on the first dedicated International Pahari Language Day on 14th of April. An indication of my own educational achievement is the publication of a book that I'm editing along with another son of the Kashmiri diaspora, Professor Tahir Abbas. The book is titled Ethnicity, Religion, and Muslim Education in a Changing World, Navigating Contemporary Perspectives on Multicultural Schooling in the UK. Today, we're in the company of a group of esteemed members of our UK community. Different backgrounds, different ages, talking about our mother tongue. Each of them will introduce themselves when I first bring them into the conversation. I shall also share with you some contributions from members of the UK community and those back home not able to be here in person, but who have spoken to me through messaging. let's bring our first guest, Ibrar Hussain. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Karamat, Dr. Karamat.
Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Ibrar Hussain. I am 35 years old and I come from inner city Birmingham. My family come from Kashmir. I've grown up and I was born in the UK. I've lived in Birmingham for most of my life. Currently, I work as a registered manager for a care provider, alongside doing some further education. So I'm finalizing a PhD in health and social care policy.
Thanks, Ibrar. Just talk us through Pahari in your life, where and when you speak it, where you learned, and so on.
Okay. So for myself, speaking Pahari has always been something that has been, as you introduced, something that's come from the mother tongue, something that was always spoken at home, within the confines of the home, with the family, with my mom, my dad, my siblings, and with family members, etc. Whenever you'd go to any kind of gatherings, any functions, etc., you would then speak the mother tongue language ahead of English or ahead of any other language. So growing up, the only opportunities I had to speak the language were within the home when I communicated with my family, and at times, occasionally with friends from the same community growing up. And again, it was never so thought of as a thing. It was almost like a given. We spoke slang, I would say, what we consider to be a slang version of our language with each other. And then in later years, we realized actually how far away the language we spoke was actually from the Pahari language itself. So it was almost like a Western version of Pahari, which I know academics, some people have actually labeled it a Western Pahari dialect, the fusion of the West and our mother tongue, for example. But growing up, it was only ever spoken at home with my family.
Okay. When it comes to the language, is it easier to understand than speak it, or does it not make a difference?
I would agree. I think it is easier to understand than to speak, because I suppose for myself, the experience I've had is I've seen it and heard it around me, through family, through elders, through community people within the community, through friends, etc. And then whenever I have spoken the words, because of a lack of confidence, maybe lack of practice, often there's certain words which you don't understand, you don't know the real meaning of them. And of course, words are important, and the meaning attached to words is important in terms of conveying messages to each other. So I would say it's much easier to understand than to listen to it than to speak it. I suppose there's exposure to other languages which have similar words, similar sounds, I would say. So, for example, we've got the Hindi, the Urdu, the different types of languages that come from the South Asian continent, which often either overlap, mirror, or have similar words, which then you watch in movies, you see on the TV, through the news, etc., through the Pakistani news, the Kashmiri news, etc. So it's much easier to understand and to listen than to speak.
Okay, thank you. We're obviously talking about it and giving it a name in this program. Do you remember when you first learned that it was called Pahari?
Yeah, I mean, actually, I would say only a number of years ago. Later on, as I'm well into my 20s, it's only when I started to take a bigger interest within Pakistan and Kashmir and those kind of politics that was going on within the country, taking more of an interest in the news, watching them on a regular basis, then I started to see the difference, the disparity between the different languages and the words in Urdu, which most of the programs were in Urdu. And so then even myself, we even label it, say, Patwari, which is another, I suppose, another word to describe the language. So even when I was coming on this show with you, I mentioned to someone else and they said, oh, our language is Patwari. So even within it, the communities, and I was talking to someone who was 50 years old yesterday about coming on today, and he said, yeah, this is our language, Patwari. And they often, I suppose I always thought they were two different languages, Pahari and Patwari, until I started to realize that the language Pahari obviously comes from the fact that we come from a particular region, which is hilly, mountainous, etc. And then that word Pahar means mountain. And so it's only in recent years that I've become to understand and realize exactly which language the mother tongue is.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. I'll talk to you later on. Let's bring in Nasreen. Hi, hello, Nasreen.
Thank you for having me, Doctor.
That's all right. You're welcome. Would you like to introduce yourself? Tell us a bit about your background.
So I'm 54 years old. I'm a single mother. I have been a carer for the last 30 years, but just recently I've rejoined the career that I started back in 87. I'm from a support group for women who are predominantly carers, and we also support disabled young women as well. I'm also a champion for our local area, which is Alamrock. So I try to promote it in a positive light and show the good that we do, because at the moment on social media, it's not being given a very good name. My home, 5 generations of my family have lived here. So it's important for us to carry on the traditions and keep our area safe and be proud of it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sorry. 2 sons, 2 daughter-in-laws and 2 granddaughters. Yeah.
Thank you. Your connection with Pahari, your mother tongue, how what's the story? Where have you been speaking it? With whom? In what situations?
So it was mostly at home or with visitors. And just as I got older, I started to kind of notice that some people spoke in certain words differently. And in the community we live, we met loads of women from different parts of Pakistan and Kashmir. With the differences, because I always thought we were always speaking Midpuri until I was maybe 1986.
Okay.
And once I got to college, in my first place, I realized there was Midpuri, but then other where Patwari, Pahari, all those were included, and it became really clear to me when I got married, because we speak Pahari, but in-laws spoke Patwari. For example, they would say for example, Gus, I thought that was a river or something water related, and he said no, that's if you've got a temperature.
Okay.
Yeah, so there were slight differences, and because I was interpreting through my work, continue to do, I have picked up that the Patwari and Pahari are maybe two different things.
Okay. Okay.
Similar but different.
And as I was asking earlier from Ibrar, would you say that it's easier to understand than speak?
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
Okay.
For us, we say mother tongue is Mirpuri, but to be honest, from a young age, especially in the 70s, you were encouraged to speak English to fit in, to be able to. I mean, I remember as early as 11, I was interpreting for some of my mum's friends, or I was interpreting in the head teacher's office for a mum who couldn't explain a problem. And I mean, it was quite normal for me to be involved in some form of interpreting. And now I realize that maybe sometimes I haven't done the right thing, as there is differences in the languages. But now it's much more clearer, so you can ask people exactly what language they prefer. Like where I work now, a lot of interpreting goes on, so you can ask them which would they prefer. Would they prefer Urdu, Pahari, Patwari, Pashto? So even Pashto has two different dialects.
Okay. All right. I'll bring you in later on. Thank you for now. I'm going to share a bit of Pahari connection story from a young man who I shall call a Pahari young academic, who I spoke to. He wasn't able to join us, but he sent me some information. And what he said was, I can speak pretty well in Pahari, but I probably make a few errors. I can understand it quite well. I'm the youngest from my siblings, so I think in the diaspora, the youngest family members will have the weakest native language, because obviously you grow up with more English than your older siblings. With my parents, he said, I speak Pahari most often. With friends, also I speak it often. Then locally, takeaways, restaurants, grocers, etc. in the neighborhood where we live. Generally, I speak Pahari to elders, first generation, and people who have migrated over here. Besides that, uncles, aunties, but we don't see them often enough, maybe like weekly. I'd say Pahari is quite important, but I also feel like we're going to lose it in the coming years, in the coming generations. And that's sad, but I think it's inevitable. Without it, of course, we would lose a massive part of our culture and identity. I'm going to bring in Amber.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, if you introduce yourself, please.
Okay, my name is Amber Lone, and I'm 54, born and brought up in Birmingham, but lived in London for a long time before coming back, so I did leave Birmingham. What more do you want to know? My work is, either writing or fiction, drama, for theatre, radio, or prose and poetry, and I do workshops in that as well. So that's what I do.
Yes, your claim to fame, in my eyes, is you wrote your first book at the age of 11, I believe.
Yeah, well, the language thing is interesting for many reasons. Since then, I've done various things, and yeah. So, but anyway, so that's why I work either in some capacity or another.
Yes, I'm particularly interested in hearing your strategies that you've been using to maintain your mother tongue.
Just to echo,
talk me through.
Yeah, I just echo what some of the ways in which I've used it is the ways some of the other speakers have said, with family and with visitors and etc. Strategies to keep it alive are almost making sure that I insert myself in situations where I visit families so I can practice it. My husband doesn't speak what we thought was Mirpuri, but he's Pahari, but he's picked so much of it up now, so he understands a lot of what my parents say, and we encourage him. He encourages them to speak it as well, and he knows words, and he always tells me jokes about going into shops and the shopkeepers being surprised that he can understand and answer back small words in Pahari. So it's part of the strategy is trying to practice it at home, but not enough, so the children don't know very much. Other than that, what strategy? I can't. You have to remind me. I'm so sorry. Was it something?
Some of the things you said was speaking to those who speak it, asking parents questions about certain words.
Yes.
Yeah. So you've been doing that for a long time, I imagine.
Yeah, so trying to play catch up and trying to get my parents to speak it with the children, because inevitably we end up speaking back in English, and I say certain words to the children, so trying to get them to do that as well, so that we're going to challenge a little bit to answer back or at least understand it. And some techniques, somebody was saying, when do they use it? I did the whole interpreting thing as well, the same as Nasreen when I was growing up. It was just inevitable. So it's almost within us to just do that. But sometimes I've found when Nasreen was talking, that when did we use it? We use it often, myself and other friends of mine, in situations where we want each other to speak without other people knowing what we're saying. So some hostile environment, or whatever. But you feel so you can talk to each other and the others won't understand if you're trying to put something across, But yeah, I've gotten a kind of growing kind of desire to maintain it, and I think that same as the academic, it will disappear. So I've got to try and increase the visits abroad, where I think it will be spoken more often, but with grandparents, family, and asking them to tell me things in the language. Of course, I don't understand it all, and of course, I can't speak it, perfectly. But I don't feel uncomfortable in it at all. I speak a lot of it, and similarly, my younger brother finds it more difficult.
Yes, yeah. There was one. There was a long list of strategies you shared with me, and I pick one because that resonated with my own journey. Because 25 years ago, I think it was, maybe 20 years ago, I realized that I was losing my mother tongue, and English was my main spoken and reading language. And I decided that actually I would make a conscious effort to start reading, because I remembered when I first came to England, a teacher saying, if you any language, if you read in that language, it will improve it. So I decided to start reading Urdu, and obviously it improved my Urdu. My reading got better, I became more confident. without realizing, it also improved my Pahari. And you said something, you said trying to read Urdu and seeing the Pahari in it.
Yes, I do. I'm so sorry. Somebody's commented that they think there's echo in my. I'm sorry, everybody, but I don't have another device on. It may just be my old phone. So my apologies. I hope it's
Okay.
coming across. There's no other device on.
Yeah,
I've
fine.
done that. I do that so much. I've read all the newspapers. I used to, sort of read the headlines and try to go past the headlines. Read all the poetry and in transliteration. And I agree with you. I think it helps so much to retain and to understand. And yes, find the Pahari in it. Find where the connections are as well. Yeah, and the differences. So I've done that and I do that. It feels good to do it. It feels,
Yes, yes. Well, thank you. We need to move on.
Thank you.
And I want to share another bit of extra from somebody who is not here. I'll just call him Pahari Man. In the UK, he's 50 plus generation. He was saying that people communicate amongst themselves in Pahari, but youngsters are detached from it. Kids tend to look down on Pahari as if, and he used the word Pandu, coming from the Pindu. He said Pahari as a Pandu trait. Obviously, kids who frequently go to Kashmir tend to have a better grasp of it than those who don't. And I said, what's a Pandu trait? What is that? How does it come about? And he said, Pandu term can be interpreted as slightly derogatory, usually associated with village people from the Pind, less sophisticated and less educated. And then I asked him, how do you see the future for the language? And he said, well, future is up to us oldies, I guess, to keep the language alive by using the language at home with young people and to give opportunities to young people to develop and keep links with their motherland. I want to move on and bring Ibrar and Nasreen. And just explore with you both the issue of Pahari language and in a work context. Nasreen, you were talking about using Pahari at work.
Yeah.
And I've been looking into the role of Pahari in the provision of services. And as it happened, what I did was I thought, I wonder whether you can get interpreting. And so I just put in Mirpuri Pahari interpreting, because I know the language was called Mirpuri in the past. And so I put that in. And actually, I came up with a very long list of interpreting services and interpreters who are selling their services. The first one, I won't give you their names because I don't want to, advertise them. And this first one says, I'm an accomplished interpreter for 15 years, specializing in Urdu, Punjabi, Mirpuri, and Pahari. And then this one says, I'm a registered interpreter for languages, Urdu, Mirpuri, Potwari, Pahari. And I'll read one more. Having worked as a researcher for 6 years, I first entered the profession of translating and interpreting. So I wanted to explore with you what presence of the language is there in the workplace. Nasreen, you were talking about using it now in your work.
Yeah.
Ibrar, what's the situation? You said you were a care manager. In the care services, is there a need for provision of services where one needs to communicate in a mother tongue with clients?
Okay. So I think within the care sector, we're going through a shift at the moment, a shift towards more and more ethnic minority customers, patients on our books than before. There's a variety of different reasons for this. In the past, families would look after their own, etc., especially within the Asian community or within the African community or the Caribbean community. They would often care for the elderly, etc. Now, unfortunately, their situations become that most people are busy working, etc. They don't have the time, or they don't have the connection with the family as much as before. So circumstances, context, the society, everything is kind of driven away that connectivity between families and their elders. And so more and more patients, more and more customers are coming through the care sector. With regards to our services, we are adapting our services to meet the needs of these various communities. But what I would say is that in terms of the Pakistani or the Kashmiri Pahari community, it still dribs and drabs, bits and literally only a few customers that would be from that community. And often what they do is they may tend to go to a company that is just specialist, and they have predominantly Asian workers.
Yes.
And that will be their go-to. And now with the Care Act, etc., with choice that people have, they can choose where they want to go. So we as an organization are adapting our services to meet the needs. So in all honesty, we have recently had more customers from the Black community. So
Okay.
we then, based on their request, we provided them with staff from the Caribbean. So the more and more that people come through from the Asian community or the Kashmiri community, we would then need to go out there and start actively recruiting people who speak the language. Because for myself, it's about giving that customer that quality and dignity. And often we've had cases in the past where some of our customers refuse to work with some staff because they don't understand their culture. They can't cook the food they want them to cook. They don't communicate as well as, say, an English person with an English person or a white person, so we are seeing changes within the sector. But within my organization, I wouldn't say that there's been a need to hire someone with a specific language. But I can see the changes within society and the way things are moving forward. We are actively looking, and I've had discussions about potentially even bringing people from Pakistan or those who've come maybe through the care visa route to offer them some kind of second job so that they can cater for those, so we can fill the gap basically, because there is a gap at the moment. We do find that there's a lot of staff that are from the ethnic minorities, but in terms of customers that then need that care, we haven't had that demand just yet, but they are growing numbers within the ethnic minorities.
Yeah, thank you. One thing that I have picked up from speaking with people who act as interpreters or organizations who are service providers is this whole area of miscategorization of the language. And people have mentioned to me that Pahari is often categorized as Punjabi or Urdu, and that is because those who need the interpreting, i.e. people in our own community, often say that their mother tongue is Punjabi or Urdu. So they end up being sent an Urdu speaker, or maybe even end up being sent an interpreter who may speak Punjabi. It could be even an Indian Punjabi. So I think we have some work to do amongst our own community to let them know what their mother tongue is called. But would you say that there is also some work to do with service providers to let them know what the language is called? What's your experience?
Nasreen would probably be best to answer that.
Yeah. Is there an understanding of what the language is called in amongst your work colleagues, Nasreen?
Yeah, so the organization I work at, which in a few other places, it's been the same. So we look at the people that we serve, and then we put staff in place who can speak those languages, because most of our money comes from charities, or our staff come from volunteer services. It's hard for us to be able to pay an interpreter, and to be able to definitely make sure that that interpreter is going to be able to do the job that we need. So because of that, we find hiring staff who can speak those languages, and we actually state that in the contract that, you know, you need, which is working really well. For example, we have a lot of Midbury, Patwari, Pahari women come to our groups, but we're finding now a lot of the Pathan women while are joining. The change we've seen is since COVID, a lot of Asian women have realized that they need to ask for help, because things are not going to get easier, and they have to reach out, and our group is like a perfect place for them to be able to share their needs. And because we are quite widely known in Birmingham now, but my aim now is to continue to spread the word of what we do, and have leaflets and things in different languages, because we need to do that more, because a lot of people speak Pahari and Midbury, they're not online. They won't be seeing the posts that other people will be seeing.
Yes, yes.
So I mean, this is perfect example of a good use of spreading what you do, and but so far so good. I mean, today we had a lady last week who's come from a totally different country, speaks Italian, and so no English, but we managed to sort things out and you know, meet her needs. So it's examples like that
Thank you.
Really,
yeah. I just want to go back to something you said earlier, Nasreen. You told us that you you'd been a parent, or you are a parent. So you obviously you went through the school system yourself in this country, but you've your children have gone through the school system. Were you taught any Pahari yourself, or your children taught Pahari in the school system?
So I wasn't taught Pahari at all. I picked up Pahari from family, and then watching whatever dramas or movies I could watch. And to learn Urdu, I'll be honest, we learned it from Bollywood.
Yes, yes.
And we did poetry in writing it in English, but Urdu poetry, because I did learn to read Urdu, but I didn't get a good enough grasp of being able to read.
Yes.
Yeah, so that really helped. And even now,
Yes.
I get my culture and my bit of language, like, because it's very part of me. I like to watch Asian dramas and movies, but my boys unfortunately hardly speak it. Yeah. One of my main problems is because my son's partially deaf, it was best to stick to English.
Yes.
Two languages would have been confusing.
Yes.
But now I'm worried that my granddaughters won't know anything.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Let me bring Ibrar in. If you unmute yourself and explore this area of education. First of all, Ibrar, you've been through the education system in this country. Were you given an opportunity to learn the mother tongue in school?
No, not at all. The only opportunity we had was the opportunity to potentially learn Urdu,
Yeah.
within the school system. And because I didn't really have a connection with Urdu, I decided to go down the route of let me learn French instead.
Okay.
But I think the problem is, like, we talk about French, Spanish, German, etc., Arabic, but actually all of those languages are broken in. There's how many versions of French and how many versions of Spanish, and so when we say Urdu, it's actually almost like saying that we're speaking Pakistani, and within Pakistani there's Urdu and Kashmiri and Pashto, etc., etc. So when I was growing up, it was almost like the connection wasn't there with Urdu, and for me, I was more intrigued to learn something different, something new. At the same time, really, the level of teaching growing through the secondary school system, because it was secondary school, they offered languages.
Yes.
And
Yes.
the level of teaching in Urdu or in Bengali, etc., the two languages that were offered alongside French, was really, unfortunately, it's not nice to say, but the standard wasn't good. The standard of teaching wasn't high. People who attended those subjects would often do them as almost like a easy option, or as a way of just having a bit of fun during that session, because they just took advantage of the teachers. Often the teachers were from abroad, who taught those subject areas, and so it was almost like, oh, let's make fun of the teacher. And that side was almost like a thought process. Oh, we're doing Urdu because we're going to make fun of Mrs. X and Mrs. Y. Same with Bengali. Whereas the French was a bit more structured. The person was English who's teaching us French. So I suppose we could relate to them a bit more. We didn't make fun of them as much as maybe our colleagues made fun of the other teachers.
Yeah. I think we've had some discussions before. You will be familiar with my work, Dear Birmingham, in that, which was written over 10 years ago. One of the things I said was, and I didn't say anything about Pahari, probably because at that time I wasn't thinking along those lines. I was focused on Urdu in the context of Birmingham. And there's a section in the book where I said that we should have a strategy for teaching Urdu, or teaching and learning Urdu, not just for Pakistani, Kashmiri children, but all children. What's your view? Should that be the case? Is it reasonable to say that schools in areas like Birmingham, Bradford, Manchester, where there are large sections of Pakistani Kashmiri communities who may have a mother tongue in Pahari or Pashto, sometimes Punjabi, who may be interested in their mother tongue or Urdu. What's your view?
So
So, I mean,
Go on, Nasreen.
So I think it should be the child's personal view, because both my sons did Urdu as a GCSE to improve what knowledge they had, improve on what knowledge they both had. They both did the GCSE, but they weren't really interested. And it didn't improve either of their language. It was just maybe just get, like Ibras was saying, it was just like getting a GCSE for easy. It wasn't easy. I remember the lessons before the exams, especially speech. They have to do the 15-minute speech. I mean, we practiced for months with my son, and it was really difficult. So it should be the family's choice or the child's personal choice, because there's languages like Arabic, which a lot of children are very interested in learning now.
Okay, thank you. Ibrar?
I can echo something that Nasreen said about choice, but if we take choice away for a moment, we've got to think about the impact as well. Now, if we're teaching Urdu as a blanket guaranteed module, a course for all students, I don't think that will necessarily have a good impact on others. For example, we know that across the world, the languages that are necessary or needed to further people in terms of employment, life, etc., are those languages that are spoken predominantly, such as Spanish, English, etc. Even Arabic is a growing language across the world. French, those kind of languages. Unfortunately, it's almost like a colonial thing. They're the languages that people can learn and actually take greater benefit from, potentially. But in terms of our communities, what I would like to see maybe is, because the reality is Birmingham is changing on a quick, and within the next 10 years, I think we'll have almost more than 50% Pakistani or Kashmiri students within the schools, so which is a big change. I remember in 2006 when I started the University of Birmingham, my first degree, there's probably only a handful of us across the whole campus. Now there's probably 10 times more now in 2024. So there are changes happening, and more of the local community, the Pakistani Kashmiri children, are achieving better education grades, etc., and then I suppose have more ambition, etc., as things are changing. But I would suggest maybe that instead of calling it Urdu, we have a module which is the language of Pakistan, or and within that we teach Urdu, we teach Pashto, we teach Pahari, we cover it in some form at least, and then the monitoring, the assessment is then built to reflect exactly what's being taught. So instead of saying we're doing Urdu, let's say the language is Pakistani, and then tell people within Pakistan there are many different languages, X, Y, and Z, like they do, I suppose, within Spanish or French, etc., or Arabic. Saudi Arabia speaks a different form of Arabic to Morocco, and then other languages. So there's so much differences within a language. I think often it's misleading to say that Birmingham, because Pakistani students, they make such a number in Birmingham, we should teach Urdu. Because actually, how many of them come from mainland Pakistan and how many come from Kashmir? So if we look at predominantly most of these kids growing, these children or the families, they're Kashmiri. So
Yes.
teaching them Urdu is actually teaching them a new language.
Yes. Yes.
So we need to teach them something that they can relate to. So maybe the module needs to be called a language of Pakistan, and actually within the next 5 years, leading figures from the community develop a module, and then they present this at the schools. Because in the next 5 years, we're going to see a lot more Pakistani students within the schools, making up higher percentages of numbers. And that's going to reflect into further higher education, and then hopefully in society as a whole.
Yes. Yes.
We need to make it representative
Yes.
of the
Thank
people
you.
that we're serving.
Yeah. So it's taking a broad brush approach for all of Pakistan, Kashmir, and then maybe specializing. So moving from the general to the particular. All right. We'll carry on exploring this issue. I'll bring in others, but thank you to you too. So welcome, Mahmood. Can you?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yes, just introduce yourself.
Sorry?
Introduce yourself. Give us a bit of background.
Yeah, my name is Mahmood Ali, and I live in Birmingham.
Yes.
I work as a trade unionist, full-time trade unionist, for the past 26 years. I'm an adult immigrant. I was 21 years old when I came in this country in 1990. And in regards to the subject matter, I'm very close to speaking, writing, and preservance of our native language called Maboli or mother tongue.
Yes.
To do that, I speak and interact with the people like yourself and others, and people like that came on, before me. I also do a bit of poetry in Urdu, Punjabi, and
yes. I would like to hear some of your poetry later on, but I particularly wanted you in the program because of your first-hand experience of both this country for the last few decades, but also you as you came here as an adult, you have much experience and understanding of Azad Kashmir and a Kashmiri academic colleague, Dr. Nazir, has written a chapter with the title Multilingualism in the British Azad Kashmiri Community. And in that, she spoke about a hierarchy of language, a language hierarchy in maybe in this country, but certainly in Azad Kashmir. In other words, some languages are seen as more important than other languages, which are seen as less important. What's your as you are somebody who went through the education system in Azad Kashmir, and you grew up there. What's your view? What is your perspective of that hierarchy? Is that true?
Yeah, but if you allow me to give a bit of background or substance to the importance or significance of the language.
Yes.
All ancient histories where they have been discovered, everybody's trying to figure out their language. What language pharaohs spoken. When people went to ancient Egypt and they found those little drawings and little pictures, and they tried to make out of it their language. Whether it's Aztec in North America or Inca civilizations, everybody's interested into the language, because language is the most apparent and first reflection of the culture. Yeah, and it gives the first impression of, as person speaks, you tend to know where the person is from, and then the whole culture falls against that backdrop. So in terms of hierarchy, I mean, look, I personally think the element of where we believe, where our fear is, and quite rightly so, that the language needs to be protected, and perhaps we need to continue to speak in this country. And I guess it's even, as I call it back home, Mirpur district where I'm from, I think a language is disappearing over there even more faster and drastically than here. And there's a reason for that. I mean, here, when people came in late 50s, early 60s, 70s, and even people like myself, early 90s, people carried on speaking what they brought from there. But things had since changed over there. But we weren't very close to that change. So I think if you are in Mirpur city, you will struggle to find people who speak Pahari language, because Mirpur city is hub of people who are consolidated from around the Mirpur, from villages around the Mirpur, where people historically, their ancestors spoke Pahari language, Apani Zaban. But in Mirpur, people tend to speak Urdu, but their aspirational language is English. They would rather speak English, but before they speak English, because the education system is in Urdu, and almost all higher education in science and humanities is in English. So prepare, and their reasons are right, because they want to prepare their children for a better future, and to do that, they want to furnish them with a language that will help enable them and support them to go through the education system. So and there is definitely element of feeling demeaned if your children spoke Pahari language. You use the word Pandu, yes, that's there, that's back home. But here, I quite often hear the word freshie and yardi. If people, not only if people spoke our own language, even if people accent isn't more fluent to giving a reflection of the white English person's sort of accent, they're saying, oh, you can tell the person is freshie, meaning that he's not born and bred here.
Yes, I've spoken to a number of people about this very subject, people back in Azad Kashmir, and I'm certainly getting the sense. I think one person spoke about that there is a not just a hierarchy where Urdu is seen as superior, but the old colonial mentality where people are emulating the previous colonial masters, the English, and actually prefer English. So even Urdu, that was above in the hierarchy, above Pahari, even Urdu is being displaced by English. One person said most teachers were from Pakistan, so they spoke Urdu, but the ones from around our own areas spoke Urdu in classes, but Pahari otherwise. And then she also went on to say that Pahari was treated as not a proper language. And another person said to me that she was very conscious from her school days of if she spoke Pahari, people would laugh at her. And they would, make fun her and say, oh, you're from the village, from the jungle, and that kind of thing. And another person has said, while Pahari is widely held universal, while there is a universal belief that primary education in one's own mother tongue is the most beneficial, when it comes to Pahari in Azad Kashmir, that is not the case. The children are not exposed to Pahari in the school system, and from day one they're told to learn the proper language, which is Urdu or English. And certainly, I believe there is now an additional hierarchy of public schools and fee-paying private schools which are English medium, and the whole institutions, I believe, operate as if their local community is Urdu or English speaking. So what does that present a problem for ordinary people, not just children when they first start school, because they're told what they know, what they've learned from their mother and their father and their family first few years, or at the end of the day, at the end of the school day, they go home to that family and community and they speak a different language. None of that counts. And they've got to learn Urdu, or saying to the local people, if they want to go to the doctor or go to the police or go to the courts, you can't conduct your business in your mother tongue. What message is that giving to the people?
I think if you look at it, I think the problem is this, and I'm going to elaborate 3 points. Problem is that what we are good at articulating problems, but we're not good at carving the solutions out of it. Yeah. So we all know what the problems is, right? And because the very rationale that's being used to diminish or demonize or demean our language, we need to address that. We need to front that up. I mean, I can make that statement. Our Pahari language that is spoken in the Potwar region is much older than Urdu language. Yeah, written history tells us that there were people living in the region, Potwar region, during Ice Age and spoke the local language. Urdu, we all know, came about very late. It's the combination and accumulation of a lot of European language, Turkish language, Persian, Sanskrit, and everything, right? So we address that point. Second point is the issue is that the influence on our lives and our way of living of elitism, whether it is the Urdu or the colonial language of English. Because I personally believe when culture leaves, the last two things that leave you is the food you eat and the language you speak. Everything else before that. Yeah. But all those things, the part of culture that actually underpin and support the spoken language, and you're quite right. Not only that, look, I've been to nursery, school, college, universities back home. Yeah. I can't remember in my days any school having any subject or even a core language subject in the Pahari language. Or any poetry program in the Pahari language, or a singing competition in Pahari language, right? It's all Urdu, if not English, if they could do it. So not only that, the uniform, when I was a kid, we used to wear shalwar kameez. Then shalwar kameez uniform in the schools and everything started to disappear. Because not only your language had to change to match the elitists or the colonial powers, right? The way we look, the way we appear and behave, yeah, and how we say good morning rather than assalamu alaikum in our language and everything, it started to change. So it wasn't just language; everything else that goes with the language is started to change. So, but the thing is, it's I think so. Who's the culprits? I personally think people like myself and a lot of other people who are much better than me in this field, that we failed our people because we have not given our people, our children, enough rationale to be proud of. From there. There's no literature. I mean, I'm working on something, and I'm working on something. There's a literature in Urdu, again, in Urdu, about, what our background is, where we come from, where immigration started and everything. But our children can't read Urdu here. So what we need to do is, to signify, to raise the profile of our culture and the language that we speak, we need to give a literature to our children in the language that they can read and understand. And it can't just only be in academia. It needs to be, my sister was already saying she does a lot of work in fiction and novels on the stage and the theaters and everything. It needs to go into the fiction as well. We need to create a fiction-orientated literature for our people to understand. And our people, the final point, you probably notice a lot of children, they don't want to tell people I'm from Chakswari or I'm from Nard or Dadia. They say, oh, I'm from Islamabad, because they think that sounds a tiny bit more fashionable,
Yes.
than saying, and it's a bit more Sharia rather than Grain, and all that. That's because they don't know. They don't know all these 200 reasons that need to be proud of from being Mirpur, right?
Yes.
And they don't know the history of the Mirpur. So we need to, because we are a dying generation. In 30 years' time, a lot of people who know this won't be around. So we need to urgently and quickly need to compile things and leave behind so that people can read who they are, where they come from, and why should they be proud of speaking the language they speak and the culture that they have.
Yeah, I think you reminded me, one person I spoke to who had also, like you, had grown up some of the time in Azad Kashmir and lived the rest of her life in the UK. She spoke about not just a language problem, but internalized racism, where people, the way they dress, she was saying, on hot days, instead of wearing kameez shalwar or kurta pajama, and as you would expect, they went around wearing trousers and Western dress and prancing around, speaking English or speaking Urdu. She used the word babu. She said, they're proper. They said, oh, I'm a babu. I'm not just an ordinary village person. So it seems as if the language problem is influenced by the wider context of a form of internalized racism or inferiority complex that is internalized, where people themselves don't value their culture or their language. Is that a fair point?
Yeah, I think a lot of others will condone. And that's absolutely right. And things that we already discussed in terms of uniforms in the schools and the common clothes that people wear. And very recently, what I noticed, because I'm born and bred in Mirpur Shah, but I mean, I always introduce myself from the little village where I was born on the river bank near Dadial called Thobjagi. I always introduce myself from my gram, because I think that's where my being was come from, my DNA, my dad, my granddad. I can actually, when I go there, I spend many hours in a graveyard trying to identify people, because you can read their headstones and you can tell who is related to who. But set that aside. So when we used to go to village, we used to have a different type of food. We used to have makhani roti and lassi with pure butter and like chaliyan and all that. But now when I go to a village, it's like they're trying to. There's such a haste. People want to be. People want to show that they are not Ghanaian anymore, although they live in a Ghanaian. Yeah, they're trying to. They'll serve you noodles. Yeah, they'll make pasta and the burgers or something and bonbons, and they'll make milkshake, a strawberry milkshake, and all that. And I said, "Where's lassi? Where's like basic kadaya dudh with malai or something?" But it is. I think the speed and the agility of the diminishing of the culture that people took upon themselves that they have to do very quickly, because there's a sense of insult. I definitely feel it. I might be wrong. There's definitely a sense of insult in people that if they could be categorized as a village person with a proper village values, that freaks them out. They don't want that. They want to be known as modern, moved on, a city person who's like a quite well seasoned in a new, the global world sort of thing, and iPhone and Samsung and everything.
Yes. Thank you for that. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your perspective. I'll bring you back later to share your poetry, but I want to move on to Imran. If you unmute yourself, Imran, and introduce yourself, tell us who you are, bit of background.
Yeah, my name's Imran. Yeah, my name is Imran. I'm an educator, so teacher by background. Still work in education, and I'm from Kashmir, Azad Kashmir, and not far from you. I'll be close by, So yeah, but I was born here, born and raised in the UK.
Talk us. You made a number of points in text about what we're discussing. I want to start with bilingualism. Our national education is based on a deficit model where bilingualism is seen as something negative, something that needs to be gotten rid of in the lives of children. And we have many children who start school as bilingual and sometimes multilingual, but by the time they leave school, they've become monolingual. In my view, it seems as if what we have is a monolingualizing education system. It knocks the bilingualism and multilingualism out of you, especially if you're a minority child. And we're very much a minority community as Pahari speakers. What's your view?
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I would tend to agree with that. In terms of what education does and the role of education, it does give a superiority to English. That's the language in which we're taught. That's the language in which we live. That's the language in which we'll be assessed in. Ultimately when we sit our exams and things like that. And so people seem to let go of their other languages, especially Pahari, for all the reasons that you've discussed so far with other guests as well. In terms of it's looked down on. There's a hierarchy of languages. People themselves are very keen to be seen as modern and take on this lifestyle. So actually, I think it requires some interventions, and some of those interventions come from parents, at home. some of those interventions come from really good teachers who value, multilingualism or other cultures and want to know and see more of that emerge in the young person. But also, I think some of those interventions can happen at the higher, what you might call the policy level. Whether it's a really strong head teacher or whether it's within society, in terms of some of the things that you've discussed, maybe it should be considered as more of a language for public services, or it should be taught across schools, and maybe not to people who necessarily have Urdu or Pahari as their mother tongue, maybe to English children, to white English children actually, for them to be able to know more and know more about us, as we're part of this society too. We're part of this country, So yeah.
Yes, that's interesting, because when I wrote about the subject 10 years ago in Dear Birmingham, I also made the point that Urdu should not just be seen as a language for Pakistani children. Anybody and everybody should be invited to learn it. And I very much thought of the non-Pakistani children, white children, Indian children, Bangladeshi. In Birmingham, where my book was focused, we have 200 communities, and I was trying to make the point that we should all try and learn about our neighbours and their cultures and their language. And so it's not just a subject matter for those children for whom it's a mother tongue.
Yeah.
And I think there's also the value, the transmitting of cultural values, which are transmitted, through the native language. The role of parenting, and number of issues like that. Let me share some things from the Pahari young academic I quoted earlier. I was having this discussion with him, and he said, I think Pahari should be taught in school and mosques the way we are taught Urdu as kids, but not just classroom-based learning, other more practical methods too. And I said to him, do you think our parents and community understand the value of being bilingual or multilingual? He said, no. Perhaps our elders do, but generally, he said, he didn't think it bothers people as much as it should. And he was also saying that some people push Urdu as a language and treat Pahari as second class. He spoke about an inferiority complex. These are his words. And I said, what do you mean by inferiority complex? And his response was, I think they see Urdu and Urdu speakers as better than them, or like more middle class, or that it signifies that you are from an educated class. So they adopt Urdu and encourage their children to speak it. So I said, so it's a bit like saying internalized racism. In his response, yeah, but I guess it's also classist. In other words, there's class bias in the way that people from Azad Kashmir, especially in the diaspora, are viewed as uneducated, unintelligent by other Pakistani communities. So there is internal, to our own community, internal prejudice going on here. And I said, are you saying the Azad Kashmir people internalize that all that is thrown at them that leads to that inferiority complex? And his response, yeah, that's exactly what's going on. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, so many, you know, I was thinking back to the way in which, like, I began my Pahari journey, you know, and it's as far back as I can remember. You know, I've mentioned like teacher interventions and stuff, and parent interventions. My first teacher was my mother, you know, and my
Yes.
my go-to person for speaking the Pahari language daily is my mother, and long may she live, you know. And I know that in addition to taking life from her and, you know, like the language from her, I also take a lot of my culture from her, you know, and a lot of my cultural values. And, you know, I remember knowledgeable people on the earth, when they've passed away, people say, oh, you know, think about all the knowledge that's left this world. But also, you know, when there's people who are rich in values and rich in culture, think about all the culture and the values we lose along with them as well. And so the next step on from some of the conclusions that you made previously in your writing, I would like to make, you know, beginning here, and maybe in the future, write more about the fact that actually the next step on from that is that they also don't want us to, you know, if Pahari is not a proper language, let me put it like this: if Pahari is not a proper language, then I'll be saying the Kashmiri are not a proper people, you know. And I think really that I think a lot of the hierarchy of languages that are at play both in Pakistan and here in the UK, you know, that's what it's really sort of saying, that although Kashmir is accepted as a place, the people are not identified as Kashmiri, and then therefore they don't have any self-determination. Why would they, you know? And they're really just another Urdu speaker or another English speaker, as it's in the diaspora, you know, and so
Yes.
are British.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's a very important point, and I think that was very much playing in my mind. All the people I've spoken to, and not just this on this occasion in this program, but I've had a number of conversations with people, and my thinking was, when you say to a child when he first arrives at school, or every day he comes to the school, and say, the language you speak at home, the words you use at home with your parents and your other relatives and family and community, just make sure you leave them at the door. Here, we only consider Urdu and English as proper. I wonder what message it sends to that child about his own self and self-worth. And when you say to a patient, as somebody was, when I was talking to them this afternoon about this subject, and he was talking about people who have a problem conveying what their medical needs are to a doctor, because the doctor has been educated in English and in Urdu, has come from Pakistan, and is now sitting in front of them, charging a lot of money. It's saying to that patient, look, before you can tell us about your illness, you better go and learn to speak proper, and then come back and communicate what the problem is, what your medical needs are.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or indeed saying to somebody who has been wronged and who wants the justice system to come to their aid. The lawyers the judges, everybody in that system speaks a language other than Pahari. It's saying, yes, before we can hear what your problem is, how you've been wronged, please go and learn to speak proper.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and this sort of reminds me of one of my earliest memories of my need to be an interpreter, for my
Yes.
mother. And it was when we were trying to access some welfare services. These used to be called Social Security back then. There was a Social Security office, and you had to go there to get some benefits and stuff, and so we were headed down there. And I was taking a day off school. I was only like sort of yay high, like 5 or 6. And I was the interpreter because mum didn't speak any English. And I remember mum saying to me, I'm going to explain. But if you don't explain to them, right, well enough, then we're really going to struggle to eat tonight, And that's how real it became, because we didn't have any food, and these people had access to money and food, and we needed to go and get it. But it all rested on my head in being able to have to explain that. Now, the really interesting thing was my mum used the word samjana, to explain. But actually, that word also comes from the word samaj, to understand, And so the implication being that having explained, you will understand. And really, and I was there, walking the rest of that way, thinking to myself, just mulling that one word over, just in my head, and it really made me think that actually, and subsequently in my life, like I said, I had great teachers, and I stand on like the shoulder of giants, and I'm a teacher today myself, or an educator in different forms, and there's this sense of identity that's very key to being able to take on language, but there's also this sense of how language works. And when we're multilingual, we have the ability to be able to think about how it will be explained, but also how it will be understood. And as an educator, that's really fascinating for me, and especially as a way of empowering people, especially to get the resources that they need to live, or to heal, or to get justice, or to even be heard in the world, and we all have a right to that, actually. Yeah.
You shared a story with me
About my English teacher.
yes. Do you want to tell us that now?
Yeah. So it was I was sat in my sort of English class in a normal sort of comprehensive school, and my teacher, she was an English lady, but she also spoke Russian. And so we were all on task, just doing our work. I must have been about 13, 14 years old. And I'm very studious, so, as I still am, and just sort of doing my work with my head down. And all of a sudden, she looked up from her desk and she said, "Imran." And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Do you think in more than one language?" And I just had to stop for a minute, and I just went, "Yes, I think I do." And all of a sudden, something really magical happened in my head. I became incredibly conscious of the fact that I can think in more than one language. And it was just like, yeah, almost the clouds parted and the light shone down my face, and it was that kind of a revelation sort of a moment. And in weeks later, I started dreaming in more than one language, more like consciously thinking that I thought in more than one language, but also subconsciously actually dreaming in more than one language. And I just thought, wow, my mind has just been opened by that one single sort of intervention again, and it changed my life, and it changed my ability to be able to think, actually, because when I couldn't make sense of some of my work in English, I started to talk to myself in my own language, like how would I explain this concept of you know, whatever it might be to my mum, for example, or somebody like that, you know, who spoke a different language. So yeah, I think realizing that actually, I think academics call it an additive approach to bilingualism, you know, where actually having more than one language adds to your ability to be able to live and operate and think and be in the world is a better approach, you know, than just to have one language.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if you were to sum up, you obviously you know you're an educator, but you before you were an educator, you were educated. You've been through the education system here, and but you have remained bilingual yourself, and now you're an educator, and you're thinking about words like additive bilingualism and, you know, deficit and all of the words associated with a monolingualizing education system. How would you sum up the benefits of bilingualism or multilingualism? In other words, obviously it's important in the English context, in the Western context, in indeed many contexts, to speak English. But how important is it to remain bilingual? How important is it to stay fluent in Pahari?
You know, it's like playing a musical instrument, you know, and like knowing a few tunes, you know, like 3 strings on a guitar, for example, or 3 keys on a piano, and then getting to the point where you can play the whole range of keys and the whole range of strings, you know, in any musical instrument, and then over time losing that ability, and then actually you're not able to make as much beautiful sounds in the world anymore, you know, and you're not able to be as greater and as a potential of musician as you could have been. And really, language is the music that comes out of our mouth, you know, and we all play that musical instrument, as many people as do, you know. I know some people can't speak, and actually, you know, even almost as like even if you don't play a musical instrument in the real sense of a musical instrument, the world over can appreciate music, you know. And actually, this is why I think even being able to hear and listen to, you know, Pahari being spoken, especially by people who speak it so naturally, like our elders, to be in their presence, to be in that orchestra, you know, I can't say it in any more beautiful ways, because that's actually from my heart. That's how I feel about it, you know. Like, you really take something on, not just of the language, but also of the like ephemeral sort of environment, and like the comfort that gives to you as who you are in your identity. Because even if we change our language, we can't change the color of our skin, you know. and so we should know where we're from, be proud of it incredibly, and be amongst people who make us feel proud of who we are, you know. And so we're encouraged to speak it and allow our ears to receive it.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Some very thought-provoking comments from our young academic, and indeed from everyone here, from Nasreen, Amber, Ibrar, Mahmoud. So in conclusion, it is very important to point out that when our community first arrived in the UK, it brought very little with it. It was a very disadvantaged, very poor community coming from a very underdeveloped part of the world. Because they had traveled on Pakistani passports, the community came to be registered as Pakistani, and our language came to be registered as Urdu. Some of the first generation in the community struggled later, took many years, but they continued with it and succeeded in establishing our community's identity and the identity and place of Pahari language. Those precious foundations have since been built upon by subsequent generations. It has been a pleasure to have had some of those younger people in this episode of Diaspora Voices. It is my hope and prayer that this work will continue for many years to come. So my thanks to Nasreen, Amber, Imran, Mahmood, Ibrar, and as I said before, it would be my pleasure if Mahmood, you would finish with a reading of your poem. Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, this is the most recently I've given.
Yeah, so we generally use English in Diaspora Voices, but we were talking about Pahari language, and I thought it would be beautiful to hear your most recent work. So over to you.
Yeah, thanks. Really, just to make the point that this is about Maboli, this is a mother tongue or mother language, but it does include the elements that we discussed. That language is not the only thing on itself goes. It goes as part of the entire culture slowly diminishing. So on that basis, so I titled it as a Maboli, and it reads, Sab rasam rawaj asan satte rodi, Sab rasam rawaj asan satte rodi, par maa boli asan ajay nahi chhodi. बेड़ियां विच असां गड्डियां खलाइयां आड़ियां पट्टी तै सड़कां बनाइयां किकर पलाई कोई नहीं कपना सिलेंडरां नाल असां अग्गां पखाइयां हुण नहीं चढ़ना कोई भी घोड़ी मां बोली असां अजै नहीं छोड़ी गरियां नी राखी कोई नहीं सैना गरियां नी राखी कोई नहीं सैना बोर्ड ने थल्लै कोई नहीं बहना कोठियां बनियां चार चफेरी मिट्टी ने घर च कोई नहीं रहना फ्रिजै विच मेवे पर जबान है कोड़ी मां बोली असां अजै नहीं छोड़ी सुरमे सकड़े आले मराज नहीं रहे पेटियां पीड़ियां आले दाज नहीं रहे ढोल धमालां ते लुडियां भी मुकियां सेहरियां ने भी रवाज नहीं रहे खुले बेड़े पर सोच है सोड़ी मां बोली असां अजै नहीं छोड़ी बाड़ियां की हुण राणा कोई नहीं बाड़ियां की हुण राणा कोई नहीं मक बाजरा हुण खाना कोई नहीं हल पंजाली की सीखां लगियां बैंगी भी हुण चाणा कोई नहीं कुदरै नहीं दिसणी दांदा नहीं जोड़ी मां बोली असां अजै नहीं छोड़ी कित्थै गई ओ मां नी मधानी कित्थै गई ओ मां नी मधानी सुबह सवेरै ओ लस्सी लानी घड़े ते गड़वे असां सट्टे बगाई कोई नहीं भरना खूह् चूं पानी ना रेहा ओ बोका ना रेही डोरी मां बोली असां अजै नहीं छोड़ी मां बोली असां कदै नहीं छोड़नी माँ बोली असां कदे नहीं छोड़नी, असां नहीं इंग्लिश उर्दू बोलनी, असां पहाड़िए पहाड़ी बोलसां, कश्मीर नाल असां की इया जोड़नी, ना रहियां मावां ना उन्हां नी लोरी, माँ बोली असां अजय नहीं छोड़ी. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.